the Israeli military have been carrying more raids across the occupied West Bank. Soldiers stormed the Al-Khattab area east of Nablus, as well as the city of Jenin in the early hours. Around 26 Palestinians were arrested in the city of Hebron. While Israel has released approximately 117 Palestinian prisoners under the terms of its ceasefire deal with Hamas, it has arrested 116 Palestinians in raids in the occupied West Bank over the same period. Now, more than 200 Palestinians have also been killed in the West Bank since Israel launched its bombing campaign in Gaza. Now, for more on all this, let's now cross live to Tel Aviv and speak with Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic. Karl, very warm welcome to the program. It's great to have you here. Now, this is the last day of the 4-day ceasefire. What is next?
Well, that's right. In fact, just to get through today is going to be a long day because while you already have 39 hostages released, 50 are supposed to be released by the last day. So right now, Israel and Qatar are both going over a list of names to be released by the Hamas in Gaza and by Israel from their prisons. So far, you have 39 Israelis, women and children have been released, and 117 Palestinian prisoners. So 11 more expected to be released tonight, but there's still a long way to go in reaching that. I'll tell you this in Israel, there's constant conversation. The media, the TVs are showing nothing but scenes of happy family reunions, from young children to elderly people who are taken hostage and in captivity for 51 days. That's only adding to the feeling that there's this growing public sentiment that they'd rather do whatever it takes to get the rest of the hostages. We're talking 190 hostages still being held in Gaza, released, as opposed to, resuming the war effort. So they need to get through the day. And then the big question is this, and this is why maybe one of the terms was never followed through in terms of the original deal, that the Red Cross would have access to the remaining hostages for proof of life, because it turns out that Hamas doesn't have all of the hostages. They were taken by different factions, including Palestinian Islamic Jihad on October 7th. So now the Qatari prime minister himself is even saying that as many as 30 to 40 women and children, Israeli women and children, are being held by other groups. And until Hamas can account for them and try to find them, which is how these pauses are being used, that may affect the truce going forward, because that's the only way Israel will agree to an extension of a truce if it's 10 hostages per day that are released. But already, for example, you have 18 children who have yet to be released. So hopefully more will be released today. But now they're having trouble tracking down those remaining women and children, keeping in mind you still have 190 hostages overall who are in captivity, including dozens of Israeli soldiers, which make it even more complicated.
190 hostages, Karl. And from the Israelis who have been released these past 3 days, we're now learning about some of the conditions of their captivity. What can you tell us about that?
Actually, some incredible stories, to be truthful. Not all were held underground. Most were, however. Of the 39 hostages, all are in stable condition, except for one, that 84-year-old woman. Israeli media reporting that not only is she in critical condition, but that her life is under threat as well. So we'll be following this throughout the day. But while the others are in stable condition, they all are also apparently very, very malnourished. While we did see scenes of like a 9-year-old boy running down the hall to hug his father and such, showing that they were able to walk and move and such like that, they were malnourished, basically eating what their captors, the Hamas guards, were eating, maybe some rice and maybe a slice of pita bread a day. And as far as sleeping is concerned, they were sitting on plastic chairs all day and putting the plastic chairs together to sleep on. And those who were held under the tunnel, there was no light at all. They could not tell what day it was. It was damp. And the first thing that hostages received when they were released actually were eye tests to make sure they were okay. And there was one really strange incident where an Israeli-Russian captive actually managed to escape for 4 days because he was being held not underground but in a building that was bombed by the Israeli airstrikes. And he was able to run away for 4 days, but he had no idea where he was, didn't speak the language, and he obviously stood out because he was Russian, Israeli, and also blonde, and he was recaptured. But because he was Russian, he was released by Hamas.
Now, of course, as you're highlighting, what seems to be the main focus of the conversation now is humanitarian aid. What difference have these 4 days of ceasefire meant for increasing this much-needed humanitarian aid?
Well, you heard from the UNICEF spokesman just a moment ago. To be honest, while it's a sign of progress for the aid to be going in, we're talking water, food, medicine, and even fuel. It's really just a drop in the bucket. In other words, what's going in terms of food is only making 10% of Gaza's food needs. It's still facing starvation. In terms of water, maybe 4% of salination. Give you an idea of just how bad it is. Because of lack of fuel, for example, Gazans have been resorting to burning door frames and window frames to cook food because of lack of fuel. And if they don't cook instead, they're just eating raw onions and eggplants, for example. And in terms of water itself, 70 to 80% of it is unclean water, non-drinkable, and they're using seawater to bathe and wash their clothes. And they're filtering water by pouring water through their clothes in order to filter because it's so polluted. So these are dire conditions. So an extended truce would just be a step in the right direction to restoring some normalcy to life in Gaza, which right now is still very, very dire.
All right, then. Thank you so much, Arise Special Correspondent Karl Bostic, for being on Newsday. We appreciate your analysis and update.